Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Smith. I'm a registered dietitian, and I'm here on behalf of Harvard Pilgrim Health. Welcome to some food safety in the summer. So let's get started, and happy summer. All right. So before we get into food safety, what I would like to do is introduce you to what actually creates an unsafe environment or what causes foodborne illnesses or food poisoning. So let's take a look at microorganisms. Microorganisms or bacteria, mold, yeast, fungi. This is what can create food poisoning. And they're germs that basically thrive off of warm climate, moisture or water, and food. And that's the environment we're in right now, especially in the summer. These microorganisms also thrive off of people. So we can carry these microorganisms, bacteria, yeast, believe it or not, fungi. Animals are also carriers of microorganisms. Pests such as flies or cockroaches or mice. The air can also carry bacteria and microorganisms as well as water and soil. So plants can also carry microorganisms, things like fresh fruits and vegetables because they come from the soil. The danger zone for bacteria to grow rapidly, the temperatures between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So think about those foods and the temperatures that they're left out at. We want to keep them out of that danger zone because after 2 to 3 hours, that's when they can start to develop and grow bacteria and cause foodborne illnesses. And why should we be concerned with food safety? Well, as you can see here, according to the CDC, they estimate over 48 million people get sick per year. That's 128,000 that are hospitalized, and over 3,000 can die from foodborne illnesses each year in the United States. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like to walk you through the whole process of preparing food. And I don't want you to think about just cookouts but what's happening at home besides cookouts, and are you visiting festivals or picnics or fairs? So think about not only at the home, but also where do you tend to eat? And is it outdoors? And how is the whole process taking place? How are they preserving the food? How are they keeping it safe from foodborne illnesses? But let's start with shopping. How can we ensure that our food is safe to consume just with the shopping process? So I usually encourage people, if you're going to go grocery shopping at hot temperatures, be it 90 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, maybe bring a small cooler with you or a bag that's insulated that will keep your cold foods cold. So it's important to keep in mind what foods tend to decay quickly. So things like produce, fruits, and vegetables can decay quickly. When you're purchasing these, try not to purchase those that are bruised or cut. If you do purchase produce that's bruised and cut, and you bring it home, just cut that part of the vegetable off. Don't consume that because we don't know if it's harboring microorganisms or bacteria. Other things like fresh herbs can decay quickly. And again, pay attention to these products that may be in plastic bags or containers. Make sure that they're not drenched in excess moisture or liquids. If they are, I suggest that when you get them home, take them out of the packages where they're moist and dry them off and maybe put them in a new package, or maybe just put a dry paper towel in there to absorb the moisture. Because remember, moisture is one of those that harbor bacteria and allow it to grow quickly. Dairy products can also harbor bacteria. So again, when you're shopping, and if you find that you're running errands between shopping and returning home and it's hot out, maybe put your dairy products in a cooler with an ice pack or bag that's insulated, and we'll keep it at that temperature of 40 degrees or below. Same thing with poultry, shellfish, and meat. These can harbor bacteria if they're held at a temperature above 40 for more than an hour in 90-degree weather. So again, those would be great to put in a cooler if you're not going to return home quickly. And then also things like breads and pastries. Sometimes we don't think about this, but fresh baked breads and pastries, if they're warm and they're put in a plastic bag, they may create a little condensation and moisture, and then they can mold quickly. So like I said before, if you're bringing those products home and you notice moisture, remove them from the bag, dry it out, or put it in a new bag. And remember, when you're storing your groceries, try to keep the raw meat separate from the produce. You want to keep the juices from the meats away from the produce, especially if you're planning on eating that produce raw, because the meat can carry things like salmonella and E. coli. So it starts with shopping. The next step is cleaning. So not only washing your hands, but also preventing the environment that you're working in clean. So make sure you wash your hands before you touch the food with soap and water. The rule of thumb is about 20 seconds. And again, try to, if you have pets in the home, or let's say you're at a cookout or at a festival or a fair, make sure that you wash your hands after touching pets, because remember, pets and pests can carry microorganisms. Definitely after you use the bathroom, make sure you wash your hands. And I always recommend, and we're probably doing this now because of the pandemic, I'm sure you are all like myself, and we have wipes in every car and in every pocketbook that we can think of. So make sure that you're carrying hand sanitizer or wipes. So if you're in an environment that doesn't have a bathroom accessible, you can wash your hands off with hand sanitizer or wipes. If you're coughing or sneezing, you should wash your hands. And if you're caring for others or babies, basically if you're changing diapers, or if you're caring for someone who is sick or ill, again, wash your hands before you work with any food or before you eat. And the same thing with treating a cut. If you have a cut and you're preparing food for others, it's important to wear a Band-Aid, or I always suggest, I always like to have gloves. You can purchase plastic gloves in the grocery stores, and they work great when handling meat, or if you have a cut, and it protects the cut and it protects others from your cut as well. And then as far as preventing cross-contamination, make sure that the counter space is cleaned frequently before, during, and after food prep. So maybe using wipes, again, disinfecting wipes or antibacterial soap. Make sure that the counter space is clean. If you're in an environment, again, that's away from home and you don't have those materials available, then maybe bring some surface wipes. And then as far as plates and serving utensils and cutting boards, when you're working with raw meat or poultry or shellfish, let's say you're doing a barbecue or a grill, make sure that you change the plates out that you're serving. Let's say you put the raw food on a plate and you have utensils and you go to place it on the grill, make sure you change that out with clean utensils and clean plates or serving dishes, because remember, that raw food, that bacteria will be on the plate and utensils. So always switch them out. I know that sounds like a lot of dishes to take care of, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Again, especially for those who are immunocompromised, they're more likely to get sick from foodborne bacteria. Make sure you wash your produce before you eat it, especially raw produce, because again, it comes from the soil. And remember, soil harbors bacteria. The CDC and the EPA is now recommending not to wash your meat or poultry because they're finding that that causes cross-contamination. Years ago, we used to pull our poultry out of, and we probably still do this. I know I will do this once in a while. So I'll pull my poultry out of the package and I'll rinse it out underneath the sink. Well, now they're discouraging you from doing that because we cook our meat to a safe temperature and it kills the bacteria. When we wash the meat, what happens is it splatters, and then that bacteria, be it salmonella or E. coli, could get onto the other food or to your counter space. And then separate. So remember to keep things separate. So like I said earlier, keep your raw meats separate from cooked meats or produce, because the juice in the raw meat could seep into that food and contaminate it. And same thing with when it's in your refrigerator. So a lot of times if you're pulling meat out of the freezer and you're putting it in the refrigerator to defrost, I would suggest putting it on a plate or in a pan, or storing it in a container underneath the produce. Do not store it on top of raw fruits and vegetables, because those meat juices can leak and seep into the raw fruits and vegetables. So again, try to keep that liquid contained. If you're putting your meat in a cooler, I would highly suggest have a separate cooler for meat. I notice sometimes when I'm at a barbecue, I'll see people put their raw meat in the same cooler with their beverages and maybe their salads or casseroles. So try to use a separate cooler for raw meats and a separate cooler for beverages and produce, again, to avoid cross-contamination. And the same thing for food prep. For instance, if you're using a cutting board to cut your raw vegetables and meat, make sure you use a separate cutting board for meat, raw meat, and a separate cutting board for fruits and vegetables. You don't want to use the same cutting board for cutting raw fruits and vegetables with raw meat, because again, you will expose your fruits and vegetables to bacteria. Same thing with cooking and grilling. Usually it's suggested cook the meat first, get it to a good temperature before you put the vegetables on. The vegetables are going to cook quickly. They may not get hot enough if you put them on with raw meat, and you could expose them to bacteria. So, just try to pay attention to how you're grilling, or maybe put vegetables on a different shelf. Sometimes the grills will have two shelves, and you can put the vegetables on top and the meat down below. Never put the meat above the vegetables, because again, the juices will drip onto the vegetables. So just separate the raw from the produce. And then as far as cooking and grilling, make sure that you cook quickly and use shallow containers. So think about when you're at home. I know I was making a dish for a barbecue, and I wanted to cook it ahead of time. And it was something that I needed to cool off quickly before. So if you're going to cook something ahead of time, I think I was making buffalo chicken wraps or something. So there's animal protein in there, there's dairy, so a great risk for cross-contamination and foodborne illnesses. So I cooked it up, and to cool it off quickly, to get it below the temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I put it in a shallow container. Keep in mind, if you just finish cooking something and you put it in a container that is small and tall, let's say, the food isn't going to cool quickly in the center, and you're at an increased risk of bacteria growing. You could still put that in the fridge, and it still may take more than 3 hours for this internal temperature of that food in the center to cool. So always cool something in a shallow dish. So what I did was I took my dish that I made, I put it in a casserole dish, very shallow, no more than an inch or two deep, and I put it in the refrigerator. Now, if I was in a pinch and I needed to cool off quickly, I would put it in the freezer. So definitely the key is cooling quickly and reducing the surface area, so the internal temperature will get to below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. At a safe temperature. Because remember, if we keep the food above 40, between 40 and 140 for more than 2 to 3 hours, bacteria will start to grow. Now, a lot of times with grilling and cooking, we like to marinate our food. So it's highly recommended, do not reuse the marinades afterwards. A lot of times I've seen people marinate their food and then they'll pour it on top afterwards. It may not get to a hot enough temperature to kill the bacteria. Just dispose of the marinade. You can always make another one on the side that hasn't been exposed to raw meat. And then again, I think I mentioned this earlier, make sure that you use clean utensils and clean plates to remove your cooked meats. Do not use the plates that you marinated or place the raw food on prior to cooking or grilling. Keep hot foods hot, so that's over 140 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm a big fan of using a meat thermometer. It just comes from my food science background. Not a lot of people use meat thermometers. Highly recommend them. They're small, they're portable, and it's better to be safe than sorry, and you can get them anywhere. So I have here just a brief food temperature for certain meats. So if, let's say if you're cooking steak on the grill or pork, you want to keep the temperature between 145 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can't tell by looking at it. I guess you could cut it in half and tell if it's cooked through. And typically meat, some people like to eat it rare or medium rare, which can be safe. It's the ground meat that is not safe to eat under like at a rare, medium rare, or under medium well, because the center of the meat won't get hot enough and you may not be able to kill the bacteria in ground meat. So I'm talking ground beef, ground pork, sausages, or ground chicken or turkey. So the goal is to cook ground meats to an internal temperature of 160 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. When you use this food thermometer, try to place it in the center of the meat. That's where you want it to reach that temperature. And then poultry, again, this is something you definitely do not want to undercook. So the temperature of poultry should be around 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature. Fish should be about 145, and any type of casserole, you want it to stay around 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, if you make a casserole for a cookout or a picnic, try to keep it to above 140 degrees Fahrenheit for more, if you're letting it sit out for more than 2 hours. And then chilling the food. So you want to keep cold foods cold. So cold food should remain at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below. All right, so again, the raw meats, your lunch meats or your cooked meats, salads, if they're prepared with mayonnaise, so think about potato salad, or if you made a broccoli salad, anything with mayonnaise, because mayonnaise is made from eggs and oil. So remember, animals can carry microorganisms. So eggs come from an animal. So anything that comes from an animal is at risk for carrying bacteria. So keep those either in an insulated cooler or on ice, and keep them out of the sun. So that's the other thing that microorganisms love, is the lack of our attention. When we go to picnics or festivals, we're not real mindful about this type of stuff. And so if we're careless or we're not paying attention, we can be at great risk of getting a foodborne illness. So pay attention to the foods that you're consuming at these events, and ask yourself, how long have they been sitting out and what is in it? For instance, if I've been to a cookout and I see a macaroni salad that's sitting in the sun and it's 3 hours later, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to eat it. I just don't want to get sick. Check the refrigerator and freezer for accurate temperatures. So your freezer should remain about 32 degrees or below in Fahrenheit, and your refrigerator should be under 40 degrees Fahrenheit and below. And again, remember, if you are putting cooked food in the refrigerator, make sure that you store it in a shallow dish, not in a deep, tall dish. I have some pictures here. I love some of the creative ways that people keep their food cool. This was one of my favorites in the center. It's at a picnic and someone took a plastic container and they filled it with ice. And you can see they have their macaroni salad in there, the dressing, anything that's at risk for bacteria. They've kept it on ice and it's in the shade. Or on the left here, again, you can see this big bowl here with foods that have animal products or would be at risk for foodborne illness, and they've placed it on ice. Then if the ice melts, just keep replacing it. And here's a picture of a cooler with just beverages. So remember, with your meats, do not place them in the same container as beverages or produce or salads. And remember, if the temperature is greater than 90 degrees Fahrenheit, do not leave your food out for more than an hour. And then one thing I wanted to touch upon, just because we were away last week and I saw a lot of raw fish. And we were in an area, it was in Miami, and it was very, very hot. And they do have oysters down there, and they also have something called brackwater. So be mindful of this for those of you who like raw shellfish. Know where the fish is coming from. You don't want to consume raw fish in an environment where there may be brackwater, and if the fish was stored in warm water. So if you're going to eat raw shellfish, make sure it came from cold water, and make sure that it remained cold and on ice. There is a bacteria that harbors on oysters, for example, that has come out of brackwater. Brackwater is basically let's say lake water mixed with a little bit of salt water. So if you've ever been to Florida, you've probably seen the marshes, and that's what brackwater is. And it carries a bacteria called fibriosis. And so you want to be mindful not to consume shellfish from that type of water. And you'd want to avoid eating those during the months of May to October. So again, if you're having raw shellfish, know where it comes from and make sure that that it came from cold water and they kept it cold, because you do not want to get sick. Okay, so this is the end of our presentation. Please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat box. I'll be more than happy to answer them for the remaining 5 minutes. These are some resources that are very helpful if you wanted more information, or if you wanted to share this information with your partners or spouse or whomever. So servedsafe.com is a great resource. The cdc.gov, they have great food safety tips, all types of information about foodborne illnesses, safe and minimal internal temperatures. So definitely take a peek at these. Feel free to take a snapshot of these resources if you'd like to. Let me take a look at the chat box, see what we have here. So what about pork? So great question. Pork, you would definitely want to cook well. I wouldn't want to cook it under. So basically where it said meat, you want to cook the pork to about 150 to 165 for an internal temperature. So that's a great question. There is a bacteria that harbors in pork, and you definitely would not want to eat it raw, whether it's ground or let's say it's a pork tenderloin or a pork chop. You would want to make sure that that's well cooked. Very good question. Are there any other questions? Well, if not, thank you all for attending, and I hope you found this helpful, and enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea.